think about um, the smartest person you know.
Right.
Now imagine they spend their entire life looking through a microscope,
Okay.
and they're completely convinced that this tiny mechanical world is like all there is.
Yeah, they're hyper-focused.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, someone else spends their whole life looking through a telescope, equally convinced that the vast cosmic void is the only thing that matters.
Right, the exact opposite scale.
And for centuries, we've basically forced these two people to fight. We tell them one must be right and the other has to be wrong. But what if we suddenly realize they were both just looking at different ends of the exact same tube?
I mean, that's a total paradigm shift. Because at that point, you're not looking at a war between competing ideas anymore.
No, not at all.
You're looking at a profound failure of translation. You realize the conflict itself is just an illusion.
Yes. And welcome to today's deep dive. If you're listening right now and you're the kind of person who is always hunting for knowledge, but sometimes you just feel totally paralyzed by information overload.
Which is so common today.
It really is. Well, this is going to be incredibly liberating for you. We're exploring this really fascinating, highly poetic video transcript titled The Doctrine Volume 2 by Rafa Ben Hood.
It's a fantastic piece.
It is. And our core mission today is to unpack a philosophical concept presented in this text called the synthesis.
Right, and the core premise of the synthesis is that science, logic, and faith, they were never actually opposing forces.
Right.
The philosophy suggests that long ago, before we built these massive, rigid walls between different schools of thought, human knowledge was unified.
Unified, yeah.
Like scholars, priests, scientific seekers, they were essentially looking at the exact same sun, just standing at different angles.
There's this beautiful central metaphor here that we have to talk about.
The shattered mirror.
Yes, exactly. The idea that the world, as we experience it today, isn't broken. It's a shattered mirror. There are millions of pieces scattered everywhere, but every single piece is reflecting the exact same original fire.
We didn't lose the truth.
Right. We just got obsessed with the shapes of the broken glass and forgot how to look at the reflection itself.
Yeah, we started categorizing the shards. We put the sharp pieces in one box and called it physics.
Physics, sure.
And we put the smooth pieces in another box and called it theology. But the argument here is that faith, science, and wonder, they are literally the exact same mechanism.
Just painted as enemies by history. Let's ground this with a real-world analogy. Think about wandering through a massive modern university campus.
Okay, yeah.
Over on the west side, you have the physics department. Concrete building, whiteboards full of complex math where they talk about quantum entanglement.
The hard sciences.
Right. Then on the east side, you have the theology department. Stained glass, ancient texts, people discussing the interconnectedness of the human soul.
Completely different vibe.
Totally different. And maybe down the hall, the psychology department is analyzing the subconscious. And they are completely walled off from one another.
They host their own conferences.
They publish in their own journals. They use entirely different vocabularies. They are absolutely convinced they're studying different realities.
But if we apply the synthesis, we see they're all just holding different shards of that exact same mirror.
They're all just trying to describe the architecture of reality.
And I think this is why this concept is the ultimate antidote to information exhaustion for anyone listening.
Oh, absolutely. How so?
Well, when you try to understand the world by memorizing a million isolated facts from a million walled-off disciplines, your brain just hits a wall.
It's exhausting.
It is. But if you shift your perspective to the synthesis, you realize you don't need to memorize the encyclopedia. You just need to spot the patterns.
Look for the fire.
Exactly. You look for that single, unified fire reflecting across different subjects. Learning becomes less about accumulating trivia and way more about pattern recognition.
Recognition. That's the perfect word for it. Because if the truth was never actually lost, but just fractured into these different dialects, then the missing pieces aren't buried in some ancient tomb.
No, they're hiding in plain sight.
Right in front of us.
The text suggests that ancient secrets aren't physical artifacts waiting to be dug up. They're hidden in the way we speak, in the geometry of nature, and in the recurring patterns of human behavior.
Religion historically guarded the mystery, and science mapped the stars, but they were describing the same underlying magic.
Science gives us the how, mapping the mechanics, while faith gives us the why, offering purpose. But they are meant to lead to the same heartbeat.
Okay, I actually have to push back here for a second.
Sure, go ahead.
Because this sounds incredibly romantic. But let's look at the mechanics of that claim. Saying Science and ancient myth are the same magic is a huge leap.
It sounds like one, yeah.
Objectively speaking, some myths are just factually, scientifically wrong. Like, ancient people thought the sun was pulled across the sky by a guy in a flaming chariot.
Right, the literal interpretation.
Yeah, so how do we reconcile those glaring scientific inaccuracies with the claim that they were just using a different dialect of truth? Are we supposed to treat a myth about a flaming chariot as encrypted quantum physics?
Well, that is the crucial question. And to answer it, we have to distinguish between the literal imagery and the underlying mechanism.
Okay, explain that.
When ancient minds used mythological language, they weren't being primitive. They were using the highest technology available to them at the time.
Which was narrative and metaphor.
Exactly. They used those tools to describe deep underlying laws of reality.
Can you give me an example of how that translation actually works?
Absolutely. Think about ancient creation myths from all over the world that claim the universe was sung into existence.
Or spoken into being through a cosmic word.
Right. For centuries, post-Enlightenment thinkers just laughed at that, called it a quaint, unscientific fairy tale.
Because there's no giant mouth in the sky singing.
Exactly. But look at where quantum physics and string theory are today. At the subatomic level, matter isn't made of solid little billiard balls.
It's vibrating strands of energy.
Yes. The universe is quite literally a symphony of vibrations. So the ancient people who said the world was sung into existence were describing the exact same underlying architecture.
Just without the mathematical vocabulary of a 21st century physicist?
Exactly. The function of vibration is the magic they described. It's the same phenomenon.
Oh, wow. That actually makes perfect sense. So it's not about taking the flaming chariot literally.
Not at all.
It's about recognizing that they were trying to articulate celestial mechanics, predictable cosmic cycles, using the cultural dictionary they had at the time.
Precisely. And when you realize that, logic and belief can finally shake hands.
Matter, mind, and spirit stop being a battleground and start being three different languages describing one single world.
Which is a beautiful realization.
It is, but that brings up a really dark historical question.
I think I know where you're going with this.
Yeah. If this unified truth is so beautiful and resolves so much conflict, why isn't it widely accepted? Why have people been burning each other at the stake over this for centuries?
Oh.
The text takes a pretty sharp turn here with some heavy imagery.
It does.
It specifically talks about the Templars being burned, quote, beneath the crown and cross.
Yes. And this points to a fundamental reality about how human societies are structured.
How power is maintained.
Exactly. Achieving the synthesis, actually seeing the whole picture, has historically been deeply threatening to institutions of power.
Because it removes their leverage, right.
Right.
The philosophy argues that the real crime of these historical groups wasn't heresy.
No, their crime was that they opened the sanctuary for, quote, unready eyes to glimpse.
They mingled the concepts of good and evil, science and spirit.
And suddenly kings grew cold and priests grew afraid because, and this is the key phrase, they were facing men no longer easily swayed.
Let's break down the mechanics of power to understand why that's so terrifying to an institution.
Well, if you want to govern a massive population, the most efficient tool is division.
Divide and conquer.
Always. If you can force society into binary camps, say, this side is entirely good, that side is entirely evil.
This is pure science, this is pure religion.
Right. People will cling to their authorities for safety. You rule through that division.
Because if I'm terrified of the evil side, I'll gladly hand over my money and my autonomy to the king or the priest who promises to protect me from it.
Exactly. But a person who sees the synthesis cannot be controlled by dogmatic fear tactics.
They look at the king, the priest, the opposing army, and they see the shared underlying reality.
They understand that power is a construct.
Yeah.
And power hates nothing more than someone who sees right through it.
That leads to one of the most provocative ideas in this whole deep dive. There's a concept presented that says, to know is not to stand above, it is to bear what knowledge does.
It's incredibly heavy.
It really is. Because it implies true synthesis doesn't make you superior or smug.
It makes you intensely responsible.
I do want to challenge this, though. Because if we follow this philosophy to its logical conclusion, it claims that good and evil wait as one, a double-edged no hand outruns.
Right.
Doesn't acknowledging the interconnectedness of good and evil just lead to moral apathy?
How so?
Well, if good and evil are just two sides of the same coin, why should anyone fight for justice? Like, why do anything at all?
That is a very common trap people fall into when studying non-dual philosophy, but it's actually a misinterpretation.
Okay, straighten it out for us.
Seeing that good and evil are connected doesn't mean they are the same thing. And it certainly doesn't mean you stop caring.
What does it mean then?
It means you lose the comfort of righteous certainty.
Ah, the comfort of the walled garden.
Exactly. When you live in a walled-off binary world, you get to say, my tribe is 100% right, and your tribe is 100% evil.
It's intellectually lazy, but it's deeply comforting.
Right. But when you break down those walls, you bear the burden of nuance.
You suddenly have to recognize the capacity for darkness in your own tribe.
And you have to recognize the valid humanity and logic in your opponent's argument. That doesn't lead to apathy.
It leads to an agonizing level of empathy.
That is the burden. Knowledge strips away the protective mask of your tribe and leaves you facing the complexity of reality entirely unshielded.
Wow. The burden of nuance. That completely explains why society resists it. It's so much easier to just stay asleep and pick a side.
Much easier.
So if the world naturally resists this unity and the burden of seeing it is so heavy, how does an individual, like the listener tuning in right now, actually achieve this state?
Without being completely crushed by it.
Yeah, exactly.
The material provides a very specific psychological blueprint for this. It's all about becoming what it calls the axis.
Right. The idea is that you don't choose between the currents. You don't try to permanently defeat the dark with the light.
The philosophy talks about holding knowing in your right hand and the branch of life in your left, and stepping beyond the strife.
Notice the method there. You don't achieve this by fighting. The text is explicit. I don't heal by force or fixing. I don't fight what comes undone.
Instead, you allow oppositions to generate a tie. You don't kill the war inside.
You balance it. Heaven moves because I move it. Hell is honest under me.
Okay, I love the poetry of heaven moves because I move it, but what does that actually mean for us on a Tuesday afternoon?
Right, practically speaking.
Yeah, if someone is sitting in a horribly stressful meeting or navigating a massive life transition, how do they actually transmute that stress?
We need the mechanics here, not just a poetic platitude.
Well, let's talk about the psychological mechanism of cognitive reframing and emotional regulation.
Okay.
Most people try to find peace by escaping chaos. If they're in a stressful meeting, they try to force the room to calm down, or they try to suppress their own anxiety.
They fight the chaos.
But psychologically, fighting a feeling just gives it more energy.
What you resist persists.
Exactly. The concept of becoming the axis is about harnessing that chaos. In psychology, this is akin to becoming the observing ego.
You don't suppress the tension.
No, you act as the fulcrum. You let the anxiety, the anger, or the opposing opinions swirl around you, but you observe them neutrally without absorbing them into your identity.
So you become the pillar.
You become the unmoved center in the current where all influence meets its end.
When you stop resisting the opposing forces in your life, when you accept that stress and peace, success and failure are just currents, they lose their power over you.
You enter the chaos, but the equilibrium moves through you.
You take the broken scraps, the heavy weights of your life, and you transmute them by no longer fighting them.
It is literal emotional alchemy. You are letting the opposing forces of your life balance each other out by acting as the center point.
But here's the catch, and I think this is where the philosophy turns from a fascinating thought experiment into a very real challenge.
Oh, definitely.
If you achieve this inner peace, if you sit cross-legged on a mountain and act as the perfect axis, you haven't actually changed the world.
Not at all.
The material we're exploring demands that this internal shift must translate into external action.
Yeah.
It demands what it calls the great work.
That is the climax of this entire philosophy. It's a relentless call to action. It forces the seeker to move from theoretical talk to lived, physical demonstration.
It is so intense about this. It essentially just keeps hitting the reader with, put your money where your mouth is. Demonstrate.
You have to demonstrate it, because knowing the vocabulary of these hidden currents is completely useless if you don't act on them.
Right.
You can quote all the ancient sages, you can trace the geometrical lines of nature, you can understand the quantum physics of vibration.
But the work does not answer to an idle hand.
It reminds me of a thought experiment about swimming.
Oh, I love this one.
Imagine you go to the library and you read 100 different books on the physics of water displacement. You study the history of maritime navigation. You memorize the biomechanics of the perfect human freestyle stroke.
You're an expert on paper.
Exactly. You could stand on the edge of the pool and sound like an absolute genius. You could explain the synthesis of swimming perfectly.
But until you actually jump into the freezing water and feel the panic of trying to keep your head up, you're just an imitation.
You don't actually know how to swim.
That is the perfect mechanical analogy for this. Truth is not a thing you talk about. It's a force you learn to move with.
And the philosophy offers a profound warning that should give any lifelong learner a moment of pause.
What's the warning?
All the books will stand against you till your will can cut right through.
All the books will stand against you. That is brutal.
But it makes so much sense, right?
It really does. If you just memorize the concepts of the synthesis, if you listen to a deep dive like this and think, wow, what a cool mental model.
But you don't actually change how you engage with your family or your work or your community.
The knowledge actually becomes a weight. It becomes a liability.
It becomes what they call a dead sign. Knowledge without lived execution is fundamentally dead.
The philosophy insists, no more names without the fire. No more signs without the light.
If you're going to speak about power or truth or balance, you have to let it manifest in your physical life.
Every theoretical claim you make must become a lived witness.
So let's bring this all together for you, the listener, right now.
We started with the image of a shattered mirror. The realization that all human knowledge, whether it's the strict logic of science or the deep wonder of faith, was never lost.
It was just broken into pieces. The walls we built between disciplines are an illusion.
We learned that the ancient secrets aren't buried artifacts, but recurring patterns in nature and language.
Like string theory echoing the ancient myths of a vibratory universe.
But we also learned that recognizing this unified truth is dangerous.
It requires you to bear the heavy burden of nuance, to step out of the comfortable dogmas that tell you exactly who the good guys and bad guys are.
And to survive that burden, you have to become the axis.
You use cognitive reframing to balance the opposing forces of light and dark within yourself, acting as the fulcrum so you aren't swept away by the chaos of the current.
And most importantly, you cannot stop there. You have to translate that internal balance into external action.
You must do the great work.
For anyone who loves to learn, this is the ultimate reframe. You don't need to frantically consume every single piece of data in the universe to be well-informed.
You don't need to visit every walled-off department in the University of Life.
You just need to spot the unified fire reflecting in the single shard you're currently holding. Spot the fire, and then let it warm your actual life.
It's the vital shift from merely consuming information to actually embodying it, moving from the pool deck into the water.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final challenge inspired by the source.
I love this part.
I want you to think about your own life. Think of one profound truth or a philosophical concept, or even just a healthy habit that you currently only hold in theory.
Maybe it's a concept from a book you've read or an ideal you talk about a lot at dinner parties.
Now ask yourself, what would your life look like tomorrow if you were suddenly forced to put your money where your mouth is?
What would it look like to finally stop reading the scattered pages in that ruined library and actually start building something real with the bricks?
Put your money where your mouth is. Step into the current, prove it. Truth is not a thing you talk of. It's the force you learn to move with. All the books will stand against you till your will can cut right through it. You don't know until you do it. Put your money where your mouth is. You don't know until you do it. Put your money where your mouth. Demonstrate, demonstrate, demonstrate.